Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Cha, and today I'm going to be going over the Krebs cycle, which is also known as the citric acid cycle. Don't ask me why there's two names for the same thing. Probably some scientists discovered it at the same time, and their egos got the better of them. So now we all have to suffer. So I'm going to be going over an overview of it, so I'm not going to go super in depth onto each of the specific enzymes or the products, etc. But I'm just going to teach you a few tips and tricks of how I remember the Krebs cycle without not really remembering the Krebs cycle, if that makes sense, since quality over quantity, as I always like to say. So I have an acronym for the Krebs cycle that I like to use, or acronym, mnemonic, however you like to call it. So it is this, and it's kind of dirty. So can I keep selling sex for money, officer? So C for citrate has 6 carbons, I for isocitrate, K for alpha ketoglutarate for keep, selling, or S for the first one, I should say, for succinyl-CoA. Now we're down at 4 carbons, sex for succinate, 4 for fumarate, money for malate, and officer for oxaloacetate, which is that 4 carbon. Okay. So some important steps, or like just tips, I should say, not necessarily steps, is that for each glucose molecule, you'll have 2 acetyl-CoAs that will enter the Krebs cycle. Because remember, you're producing each one produces pyruvate, and pyruvate becomes acetyl-CoA before it enters the Krebs cycle from PDH, that enzyme. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff for that, but we're not going to get too into that. This is about the Krebs cycle. Um, for each acetyl-CoA, there will be one ATP produced. So this initially is GTP, but ATP is a more readily available form for energy, and your body wants to be as efficient as possible. So that ATP it'll take, it snatches that phosphate, which has all of that extra energy in it, because phosphate is negatively charged in for hence the same as adenine triphosphate. So there's 3 phosphate groups that are all really, really close together, and that's not great. Like your body doesn't, that's like a really high energy because it's unstable. You don't like having a bunch of negative charge or any charge next to each other all at once. It'll also produce 3 of my NADHs down here that I have, and then 1 FADH2. And then I snatched this from the internet just because I think it's a great image. Excuse me, and NADH and FADH2 are coenzymes. So what are coenzymes? Coenzymes are what help transfer electrons. So they're part of a redox reaction. And then in the earlier stages, so here I have the NAD plus, it'll go to NADH. It also results in a decarboxylation of alpha ketoglutarate, and I realized I didn't write the other one down, and for succinyl-CoA. So up here, right, I have like the selling, so the keep and selling. So they're right next to each other. So that's like kind of easy to remember. And then the other NADH, so the other dehydrogenase, that will be, or for NADH, I should say, that'll be for the malate dehydrogenase. So also I should touch, speaking of dehydrogenases, so whenever you see a dehydrogenase in an enzyme's name in the Krebs cycle, you're always talking about your coenzymes. So you're talking about the transfer of protons, transfer of electrons. So it's FAD plus or FAD. And just remember that for the only dehydrogenase that you'll see in the Krebs cycle, here in light purple, they have created the enzyme names, and then in dark green, that'll be the substrate's name. So the only one that will be dehydrogenase for FADH2 will be for succinate dehydrogenase, which goes from succinates to fumarate. So F, right? FAD, fumarate. So, and then F for the first letter of fumarate. That's how I like to remember it. And then most enzymes in the Krebs cycle are named after its substrate. So if you go through, right, for example, like first right near here for step number 3, you have isocitrate dehydrogenase. So that's going from isocitrate to alpha ketoglutarate. Okay, cool. So isocitrate was the substrate, so it was a reactant, and then it's going to create alpha ketoglutarate. Same thing with alpha ketoglutarate dehydrogenase, that enzyme in dark purple, going from alpha ketoglutarate to succinyl-CoA, and so on and so on and so on. You will see that as a common theme. So in MCAT, they're always going to provide you with like the names of the enzymes. Otherwise, how would you know? Usually they'll be like, oh, what does this enzyme create? Or like whatever. That's how you can kind of reorient yourself and then make sure that you remember that acronym. So you don't need to really remember all of the intermediates since that's just like torture, unless you're in a biochemistry class, then you do. But other than that, it's kind of useless, and in my opinion, a waste of time when you could just kind of think smarter, quote unquote, and not harder. Um, Also, another thing that I kind of want to point out is that succinate dehydrogenase is also, so succinate dehydrogenase is between succinate and fumarate. Because remember, like the enzyme is always named after the substrate. So succinate is comes before fumarate, right? It's that sex, and then fumarate is for in my acronym. So succinate dehydrogenase is also a part of the electron transport chain. Woohoo. And then it is the so it's enzyme 2. Um so it's in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And then remember that GTP, it occurs at like the succinyl-CoA step, so succinyl-CoA to succinate. So through the succinyl-CoA synthetase, um, and it'll create GTP because CoA, it's really high energy. So whenever you see CoA, think high energy. And what is high energy? But of course, our GDP, and which will become our ATP. So it's like when you want to join together something that doesn't want to be joined together, since remember, right? Like the inorganic phosphate and then GDP already has two phosphate groups that are already combined. It doesn't want to join together, since why would it want to have three negative charges when it already has two negative charges? So that release of that CoA, that'll allow the energy to form GTP from GDP. And then so on and so on, you'll eventually get ATP. That's kind of all I want to talk about for the Krebs cycle, also known as the citric acid cycle. Hopefully that makes some sense. And to remember, just like don't try and like kill yourself over trying to like remember all of this fun stuff. Yeah, once again, my name is Chacha. Hopefully it could be some use.